Imagine this, you're standing at the edge of the world. Behind you, everything you've ever known is gone. Ahead of you stretches an endless plain of ice and snow. The wind screams across the frozen ground, so cold it burns your lungs with every breath. There are no buildings, no roads, no shelter for 100 miles in any direction. And you have a choice. You can give up. Let the cold take you like it's taken so many others. Or you can do something that seems impossible. You can survive, not just tonight, not just this winter, but for the rest of your life, and your children's lives, and their children's lives after that. This isn't science fiction. This is real. This is the story of your ancestors. The men and women who faced the coldest, harshest climate in human history and decided they weren't going anywhere. They didn't just survive the Ice Age, they conquered it. And the way they did it changed everything about what it means to be human. Tonight, you're going to discover how prehistoric humans built shelters so warm, so clever, so perfectly designed that some of them would keep you warmer than your own home does right now. You'll meet the architects who worked without blueprints, the engineers who built without metal tools, and the families who transformed frozen wastelands into homes filled with light, laughter, and life. But before we step into that ancient world, I want to ask you for just one small thing. If you're enjoying this journey into the past, hit that subscribe button. It truly helps us continue making these stories. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Last week, someone from Iceland said they listen while watching the Northern Lights. Someone from Australia said they play these videos while falling asleep under the stars. It's incredible knowing people all over the world are connecting through stories that started tens of thousands of years ago. So get comfortable, pull up your blanket, let the warmth surround you. Because tonight, we're travelling back 40,000 years. Back to a time when building the perfect shelter meant the difference between life and death. When keeping warm required genius, courage, and a deep understanding of the natural world. And when the smartest humans on Earth discovered secrets about heat, insulation, and architecture that we're only now beginning to fully understand, the ice is forming, the wind is rising, and somewhere in the frozen darkness, a small fire is about to be lit. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Frozen Choice. The Ice Age wasn't like winter as you know it. It wasn't about putting on an extra sweater or turning up the heat. It was a world where temperatures dropped so low that your breath froze instantly into tiny crystals of ice. Where the wind didn't just chill you, it stripped away your body heat layer by layer until there was nothing left. Where nightfall meant total darkness for 14 hours and morning brought no relief, just another day of bitter, relentless cold. At its peak around 20,000 years ago, massive glaciers covered most of Europe, Asia, and North America. Temperatures in some regions dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. That's colder than the inside of your freezer. Imagine living in your freezer. Not for an hour, for your entire life. Most animals couldn't handle it. They migrated south or went extinct. But humans stayed. And the reason they could stay, the reason you exist right now, is because they figured out something extraordinary. They figured out how to build warmth. Let me take you to a specific place. A frozen plain in what's now Ukraine. It's the middle of winter, 22,000 years ago. Snow covers everything as far as you can see. The sky is grey and heavy with clouds. The only sound is the constant howl of wind across the empty tundra. But if you look closely, you'll see something strange. Rising out of the snow are large curved shapes, domes made entirely of bones, massive skulls, long curved tusks, thick leg bones, all arranged in careful circles. These aren't random piles, they're structures. They're homes, and inside those homes something miraculous is happening. There's fire, not the wild, dangerous fire of a lightning strike or a burning forest. This is controlled fire, tamed fire, human fire. It burns steadily in a carefully built pit at the center of the structure, surrounded by flat stones that radiate heat slowly outward. The smoke rises up through a small hole in the roof, escaping without filling the shelter with choking fumes. Around the fire, wrapped in thick furs, sits a family. A father sharpening a stone blade, a mother preparing dried meat for tomorrow's journey, children sleeping peacefully on soft bedding made from grass and animal hides. Outside it's deadly, inside it's warm, it's home. This is one of humanity's greatest achievements, and most people have never heard of it. These bone structures, discovered by archaeologists at sites with names like Mezhyrish and Dobranichivka, represent some of the earliest freestanding buildings ever created. But here's what makes them truly incredible. The people who built them didn't have saws, they didn't have axes, they didn't have metal of any kind. They had stone tools, animal bones, and their bare hands. And with just those things, they created engineering marvels. Each mammoth skull used in these structures weighed close to 100 kilograms. That's the weight of a full-grown adult. Some of these homes used the remains of over 60 mammoths. Imagine dragging 100 kilogram skulls across frozen ground, then carefully positioning them into a stable, waterproof structure. But why bones? Why not wood or stone? The answer reveals just how smart these people were. In the Ice Age tundra of Europe, trees were incredibly rare. The landscape was mostly open grassland. Wood was precious, used primarily for fire and tools, but mammoths were everywhere. And when they died, either from hunting or natural causes, they left behind the most durable building material available. Bones don't rot easily in frozen environments. They're incredibly strong. And when arranged properly, they create natural insulation pockets that trap warm air. So these prehistoric architects took what nature gave them and turned it into shelter. They stacked the bones 2, sometimes 3 layers deep. They filled gaps with clay, mud, and packed snow. They stretched animal hides across the bone framework, creating an outer skin that blocked the wind completely. Inside, the temperature could be 30 or even 40 degrees warmer than outside. That difference wasn't just comfort. It was the difference between survival and freezing to death in your sleep. But here's something that'll really make you think. These weren't crude shelters thrown together in desperation. When archaeologists carefully excavated these sites, they found something unexpected. Each structure was unique. Some had double walls for extra insulation. Others used curved mammoth tusks as roof supports, creating early architectural arches. Some had storage pits dug into the floor for preserving food. Others had multiple fire pits for different purposes: cooking, heating, toolmaking. These were experiments in engineering, each generation learning from the last, each family trying new techniques. Some worked, some didn't, but slowly, over thousands of years, they perfected the art of staying warm. And the most beautiful part? These weren't just functional spaces, they were decorated. Archaeologists found traces of red ochre paint on some bones. They found small carved figurines placed near doorways. They found beads and jewellery scattered around sleeping areas. These people weren't just surviving, they were living. They were creating beauty in the middle of an ice age. Think about that for a second. The world is frozen. Food is scarce. Every day is a battle against the cold. And yet someone took the time to carve a small piece of ivory into a decorative bead. Someone mixed pigments to paint their walls. Someone arranged mammoth bones not just for stability, but for aesthetics. That's not survival, that's humanity. And here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because when scientists dated these sites, they realized something profound. These weren't isolated shelters, they were villages. Whole communities of bone huts clustered together across the Ukrainian steppe. Imagine it. Multiple families living side by side, children playing in the snow between the structures, smoke rising from a dozen different fires, the sounds of stone tools clicking, people calling to each other across the frozen landscape, the smell of cooking meat drifting on the wind. This wasn't chaos. This was civilization. Frozen, yes. Difficult, absolutely, but civilization nonetheless. And it raises a question that should spark your curiosity. A controversial question. A question archaeologists still debate today. Were these people smarter than us? Not in terms of accumulated knowledge, obviously. We have books, computers, thousands of years of scientific discovery. But in terms of raw intelligence, in terms of problem-solving ability, in terms of understanding their environment and adapting to it, think about it. Could you survive in minus 40-degree weather with nothing but stone tools and animal bones? Could you build a structure stable enough to withstand winter storms? Could you maintain a fire all night without modern equipment? Could you keep your children alive, warm and healthy in a frozen wasteland? Most of us couldn't, but they could, and they did it for thousands of years. So maybe, just maybe, we've been underestimating our ancestors. Maybe the cave people we picture as primitive and brutish were actually brilliant architects, skilled engineers, and loving families who built warmth in the coldest world imaginable. But this is just the beginning of the story. Because while some humans were building mammoth bone palaces on the frozen plains, others were doing something completely different. Something we only discovered recently. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about Neanderthals. What they built might have been even more impressive. Chapter 2. Bones that whispered secrets. Let me tell you about a moment that changed archaeology forever. It was deep underground in a cave in France called Bruniquel. Dark, cold, buried under thousands of years of limestone deposits. A place where no human had set foot in over hundreds years. When researchers finally broke through into the chamber, they expected to find nothing. Maybe some animal bones. Maybe ancient mineral formations, but what they found stopped them cold. Circles. Perfect circles made from broken stalagmites, carefully arranged, deliberately positioned. And in the center of those circles, burn marks, evidence of controlled fire. But here's the thing that made this discovery absolutely extraordinary. This wasn't built by modern humans. This was built by Neanderthals, and it was built 26,000 years ago, long before our species even arrived in Europe. For years, we've been told Neanderthals were primitive, less intelligent than us, brutish cave dwellers who barely scraped by. But standing in that chamber, looking at those carefully constructed stone circles deep underground, archaeologists realized something profound. We were wrong. Neanderthals weren't just smart. In some ways, they might have been brilliant builders, and their shelters reveal a level of sophistication we're only now beginning to appreciate. Let's travel back to Ice Age Europe, about 60,000 years ago. The landscape is brutal. Glaciers creeping down from the north, forests giving way to open tundra, and scattered across this frozen world are caves, natural shelters carved by water over millions of years. Humans and Neanderthals both used these caves, but they used them very differently. When Neanderthals moved into a cave, they didn't just camp there temporarily, they transformed it, they claimed it, they made it theirs. And the way they did it shows a deep understanding of climate control that would make modern architects jealous. First, they chose their caves carefully. Not too deep, which would trap dangerous carbon dioxide. Not too shallow, which wouldn't provide protection from wind. They looked for caves with natural chimneys, openings in the ceiling where smoke could escape. They looked for chambers with stable temperatures, places where the rock itself acted as insulation. Then they got to work. At sites like Abric Romani in Spain, researchers found evidence that Neanderthals built internal walls inside caves. Not full walls, more like windbreaks. Strategic barriers that channeled airflow, directed smoke, and created separate living spaces within a single large chamber. Think about what that means. They understood air movement. They knew warm air rises. They knew smoke needed an exit path. They knew stale air could be dangerous. This wasn't instinct, this was physics. Understood and applied by people without writing, without formal education, without anything we'd recognize as science. But they knew, they observed, experimented, and learned. And their mastery of fire, that's where things get really impressive. At El Salt Cave in Spain, archaeologists found something extraordinary. Layer upon layer of carefully maintained hearths. Not random fire pits, but engineered heating systems. Flat stones arranged to reflect heat. Fire rings rebuilt in the exact same spots for generations. And most remarkably, evidence of different types of fires for different purposes. Some hearths showed high-temperature burns, probably for cooking meat or heating stones. Others showed low, slow burns, likely for warmth during long winter nights. Some were positioned near sleeping areas, others near tool-making workshops. They were zoning their living spaces. Kitchen area over here, bedroom over there, workshop by the entrance where light is best. It's the same logic we use today when designing homes. But here's something most people don't know. Something that'll really make you rethink everything you thought about Neanderthals. They cleaned their caves. At multiple sites across Europe, microscopic analysis of ancient floors reveals something incredible. Neanderthals replaced their bedding regularly. They swept debris into specific areas. They burned old plant material to kill parasites. They even dug small channels to drain water away from living areas. This isn't the behavior of primitive brutes. This is housekeeping. This is people who cared about hygiene, comfort, and health. Imagine a Neanderthal mother, 50,000 years ago, carefully laying fresh grass and leaves over a sleeping area, making sure her children have a soft, clean place to rest, checking the fire before nightfall to ensure it'll burn steadily through the dark hours. That's not so different from you checking the thermostat before bed, is it? And their innovation didn't stop there. At Kabara Cave in Israel, researchers found something that almost seems impossible. Neanderthals had built stone platforms, raised sleeping areas that kept them off the cold ground. It's the same principle behind modern bed frames. Cold air sinks, warm air rises, sleep higher, stay warmer. They figured that out 60,000 years before anyone wrote it down. Now here's where the story takes a controversial turn. A mystery that archaeologists are still arguing about. Why did Neanderthals disappear? They survived for over 300,000 years. They adapted to multiple ice ages. They built incredible shelters, controlled fire, cared for their sick and buried their dead. By every measure, they were successful. So what happened? Some researchers point to climate change, others to competition with modern humans. But here's a theory that doesn't get talked about enough. What if Neanderthals didn't disappear? What if they merged with us? Genetic evidence shows that most people today carry Neanderthal DNA. Somewhere between 1 and 4% of your genome came from them. That means our ancestors didn't just compete with Neanderthals. They lived with them, shared resources with them, had children with them, and maybe, just maybe, learned shelter building techniques from them. Because when modern humans first arrived in Europe, they encountered people who'd been perfecting cold weather survival for hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthals knew which caves stayed warmest. They knew how to position fires for maximum heat. They knew which stones reflected warmth best. Would we ignore that knowledge? Or would we learn from it? The archaeological record suggests we learned. Because after modern humans and Neanderthals started living in the same regions, we see shelter designs that combine both traditions. Bone structures with Neanderthal-style hearths, caves with modern human decorations but Neanderthal ventilation systems. It's not competition, it's collaboration. It's the merging of two brilliant building traditions into something even better. And that's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That the warmth keeping you alive right now might have originated from techniques developed by both modern humans and Neanderthals, working together to survive the ice. But caves and bone huts weren't the only innovations happening during the Ice Age. Because far to the south, in Africa, another revolution was beginning, one that would change shelter design forever. And it started with something you'd never expect, something so simple yet so brilliant that we still use the exact same principle today. If you're curious what that innovation was, stay with me. Because the answer involves grass, geometry, and a shape that appears in cultures across the entire world. A shape that might be the single most important architectural discovery in human history. But before we get there, do me a favour. Hit that like button if you're enjoying this journey. It really does help the algorithm show this video to more people who love history and amazing stories about human survival. And leave a comment. Tell me, what surprises you most so far? That Neanderthals were brilliant architects? That prehistoric people decorated their homes? That they understood physics without ever writing down a single equation? I love reading your thoughts. Now, let's head south, to the birthplace of humanity, to the place where warmth meant something completely different, and where the next great innovation in shelter design was about to be born. Chapter 3: The Fire Keepers. Fire is the reason you exist. Not metaphorically, literally. Without fire, humans couldn't have survived long enough to evolve into who we are today. Our brains needed protein, which required cooking. Our bodies needed warmth in climates we weren't designed for. Our communities needed gathering places where stories, knowledge, and culture could be shared. Fire wasn't just a tool, it was the foundation of everything human. But here's what most people don't understand. Fire isn't simple. It's not something you just light and walk away from. Prehistoric humans spent tens of thousands of years mastering fire, learning its moods, its needs, its dangers. And the way they integrated fire into their shelters reveals a level of sophistication that still impresses engineers today. Let me paint you a picture. It's 35,000 years ago. You're standing outside a shelter on the Eurasian steppe. Night is falling fast, and the temperature is dropping with it. You can see your breath now, thick clouds of vapor freezing instantly in the air. But inside that shelter you can see a soft orange glow. And when you step through the entrance, the change is immediate. Warm air wraps around you like a blanket. Your frozen fingers begin to tingle as blood returns to them. Your eyes adjust to the firelight and you see faces, family, friends, people you love, all gathered in a circle around the central hearth. This is more than shelter. This is civilization. And the fire making it possible isn't an accident. It's architecture. It's engineering. It's art. Let me show you why. First, positioning. Prehistoric builders discovered that where you put the fire determines everything about how warm your shelter stays. Too close to the entrance and wind steals the heat. Too far back and smoke can't escape properly. Too close to walls and you risk burning the structure. The solution? Central hearths. Fire pits positioned in the exact geometric center of the shelter, equidistant from all walls. This creates even heat distribution. Everyone gets warm, nobody overheats, and smoke rises naturally to the highest point, where ventilation openings channel it outside. At sites across Europe, researchers find this same design repeated over and over. It's not coincidence, it's optimization. Through trial and error, through cold nights and failed designs, prehistoric people discovered the perfect fire placement. But placement is just the beginning. At Kostienki, a massive archaeological site in Russia, researchers found something that changed how we think about prehistoric fire use. They found different types of hearths within the same settlement. Large communal fires for gathering, small cooking fires with flat stones for heating, long narrow trenches filled with coals for smoking meat, even tiny fires built inside stone boxes, probably for light rather than heat. These people weren't just building fires, they were designing heating and cooking systems, each one customized for a specific purpose. And get this, when archaeologists analysed the charcoal from these ancient fires, they discovered something brilliant. Different types of wood for different purposes. Soft woods like pine and spruce were used for kindling. They catch quickly and burn hot at first, perfect for starting a fire when you come in from the cold. Hard woods like oak and beech were used for overnight burns. They ignite slowly but produce steady, long-lasting heat and hot coals that can keep a shelter warm for hours with minimal tending. Resinous woods like birch were saved for light. They burn bright and clear, perfect for working by firelight on cold winter evenings. They didn't just burn whatever was available, they chose their fuels strategically. They managed their wood supply like we manage a thermostat, and in regions where wood was scarce, they got even more creative. In some areas, people burned animal bones. When properly dried, bones produce intense heat and burn slowly. In other regions, they burn dried dung from mammoth and bison. Don't wrinkle your nose, it works beautifully. High in organic material, it burns hot and relatively clean, especially when mixed with grass or dried moss. In Arctic regions, some groups burned animal fat in stone lamps, a chunk of seal blubber or mammoth fat in a carved stone bowl with a wick made from moss or twisted grass. These lamps provided light and steady warmth for hours, and they could be moved around the shelter as needed. Portable heating, 20,000 years before electric heaters. But the real genius shows in how they managed smoke. Smoke inhalation is dangerous. It causes respiratory problems, eye irritation, and in enclosed spaces, it can kill. So prehistoric builders had to solve a critical problem. How do you get the benefits of fire, the heat and light, without filling your home with toxic smoke? Their solutions were remarkably clever. At many sites, researchers find evidence of smoke vents, small openings at the highest point of the shelter, sometimes reinforced with bone or stone to keep them open. Warm smoke rises naturally, and these vents let it escape. But it's not just a hole. The vents are positioned to create a draft. Cool air comes in through the entrance, flows across the floor, gets heated by the fire and rises up and out through the vent. It's passive ventilation. No fans, no mechanical systems, just clever design using natural airflow. At some sites they went even further. They built small walls or screens near the entrance, creating a baffle that prevented wind from blowing directly into the shelter and disrupting the fire. Cold air still enters, but it's channeled around the sides, not blown directly at the flames. Think about that. They understood pressure differentials. They knew wind creates high and low pressure zones. They knew how to use natural forces to their advantage. And here's something that'll surprise you. In some shelters, smoke wasn't just vented, it was used. Archaeologists find evidence that people deliberately directed smoke across drying racks holding meat, fish, or hides. The smoke preserved the food and treated the leather, making it softer and more waterproof. It also coated the inside of the shelter with a thin layer of soot, which actually improved insulation and water resistance. So smoke wasn't waste, it was a resource, just like heat, light, and even the ashes. Ashes might seem like trash, but prehistoric people found dozens of uses for them. Spread on floors, ashes absorbed moisture and provided cushioning. Mixed with animal fat, they created a primitive soap for cleaning. Rubbed on skin, they offered some protection against biting insects. Packed around food storage pits, they deterred pests. Nothing was wasted. Every byproduct of fire had a purpose, and the psychological importance of fire, that might be the most important thing of all. Fire represents safety. Predators fear it. Fire represents community. People gather around it. Fire represents continuity. You maintain it day after day, generation after generation. Some anthropologists believe that the tradition of keeping fires burning continuously, never letting them go out, might be one of humanity's oldest cultural practices. At some archaeological sites, researchers find hearths that show evidence of continuous use for hundreds, even thousands of years. Layer upon layer of ash, each representing a fire lit, tended, and passed on to the next generation. Imagine that. A fire that never goes out. Started by your great-great-great-grandmother, tended by your great-grandmother, kept alive by your grandmother, now burning in your hearth. That's not just warmth, that's legacy, that's identity. And around those eternal flames, stories were told, skills were taught, bonds were formed. Everything that makes us human happened in that warm circle of firelight. But fire alone wasn't enough, because as brilliant as prehistoric fire management was, it only worked if the shelter itself was properly designed. And that required understanding something modern science calls thermal mass. Don't worry, I'll explain what that means, and I'll show you how prehistorics. People used it to create shelters that stayed warm all night, even when the fire died down. But here's a question to think about while we transition. A controversial question that scientists are still debating. Did prehistoric people actually understand heat as a concept? Or did they just copy techniques that worked without knowing why? Some researchers say ancient builders were working purely by trial and error. Others argue that to consistently reproduce complex designs across generations, you need conceptual understanding, not just copying. What do you think? Could you build a perfectly insulated shelter without understanding the science behind insulation? Or would you need to grasp, even intuitively, the principles involved? It's a fascinating debate, and the answer might tell us something profound about human intelligence and how knowledge is passed down through generations. But right now we need to talk about stones, because prehistoric people discovered that certain rocks, when heated, could do something magical. They could store warmth and release it slowly through the night, creating natural heating systems that worked without any fire at all. And the shelters built using this technique were some of the warmest in all of prehistory. Chapter 4. When Neanderthals Built Better. Here's something that'll challenge everything you think you know. What if the primitive Neanderthals actually built better shelters than modern humans? It sounds crazy, I know. We've been taught for generations that Homo sapiens were superior in every way. Smarter, more creative, better adapted. That's why we survived and they didn't, right? But the more archaeologists study Neanderthal sites, the more they realise that story is too simple. Because in many cases, Neanderthal shelters show engineering sophistication that early modern humans didn't match for thousands of years. Let me show you what I mean. In northern Spain, there's a cave called El Sidrón. Inside, archaeologists found a Neanderthal occupation layer dating to about 49,000 years ago. And when they analysed that layer in detail, they found something extraordinary. The Neanderthals living there had built a complex internal structure inside the cave. They'd divided the space into distinct zones, sleeping areas lined with soft plant material, a central hearth with a carefully constructed stone ring, a tool working area near the entrance where natural light was strongest, and even a waste disposal area at the back of the cave as far from living spaces as possible. This isn't random cave dwelling. This is urban planning. On a small scale, yes, but the principle is the same. Intentional design of living space for maximum efficiency and comfort. But it gets even more impressive. At Abric-Roman, another Spanish site, researchers found evidence spanning thousands of years of Neanderthal occupation. And what they discovered was astonishing. The Neanderthals didn't just use the same cave over and over, they improved it. Each generation made modifications, better hearth designs, more efficient smoke ventilation, improved sleeping platforms. They were iterating, experimenting, refining their designs based on what worked and what didn't. That's not instinct, that's innovation. And their understanding of insulation, absolutely brilliant. At multiple sites across Europe, archaeologists find evidence that Neanderthals lined their living spaces with layers of aromatic plants, juniper, pine needles, dried grasses. At first, researchers thought this was just for comfort, like a mattress. But chemical analysis revealed something more. Many of these plants have natural insect-repelling properties. Some have antimicrobial compounds. Others contain oils that, when compressed by body weight, release pleasant scents. The Neanderthals weren't just making beds. They were creating pest control systems, air fresheners, and thermal insulation all in one, with nothing but plants and observation. But here's where it gets controversial. Here's the question that makes some archaeologists uncomfortable. If Neanderthals were such brilliant builders, why did they disappear? The standard answer is that modern humans outcompeted them. We were smarter, so we won. But that explanation doesn't quite fit the evidence anymore. Because in regions where modern humans and Neanderthals lived side by side for thousands of years, we see something interesting. The shelters start to blend. Modern humans adopt Neanderthal techniques. Neanderthals incorporate modern human innovations. It wasn't competition. It was exchange, cultural mixing, and the result was shelters better than either group had built alone. So maybe the question isn't why did Neanderthals disappear? Maybe the better question is, did they really disappear or did they become part of us? Genetic evidence suggests the latter. We carry their DNA. We might carry their building knowledge too, passed down not through genes, but through observation, teaching, and cultural transmission. Think about that next time you arrange furniture in your home. That instinct to create distinct zones for sleeping, working, and eating, that might stretch back 50,000 years to a time when your Neanderthal ancestors first divided a cave into specialized spaces. But caves weren't the only Neanderthal innovation. Because in regions without natural caves, they built something even more impressive. Freestanding structures. At Molodova in Ukraine, archaeologists found remains of a Neanderthal shelter that predates the mammoth bone huts built by modern humans by thousands of years. It's a circular ring of mammoth bones, clearly arranged for structural support, with evidence of hides or other perishable materials that once covered it. Neanderthals invented the bone hut. and modern humans refined it. That's not competition, that's collaboration across time. And here's something that'll really make you think. What if Neanderthals didn't go extinct because they failed? What if they disappeared because they succeeded? Stay with me here. Success in evolutionary terms doesn't mean staying separate and pure. Success means adapting and surviving. And if the best way to adapt is to merge with another population, to share genes and culture and a knowledge, then extinction isn't failure, it's transformation. The Neanderthals didn't lose, they changed. They became part of something larger. And their brilliance, their shelter-building genius, their deep understanding of staying warm in impossible conditions, all of that survived in us. That's not a sad ending, that's a beautiful one. Now, let's shift our focus, because while Neanderthals and early modern humans were perfecting cave living in Europe, another group of humans was doing something completely different. Something that would prove essential when humans eventually spread across the entire planet. They were learning to build underground, and the shelters they created were so effective, so perfectly adapted to extreme climates, that people in some regions still use the exact same design today, 30,000 years later. Chapter 5: The Underground Revolution. The earth beneath your feet is one of the best insulators in existence. Go down just a few feet and temperature fluctuations disappear. Summer and winter, day and night, it stays remarkably stable. In most climates, the ground temperature at about 2 meters depth stays between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius year-round. Prehistoric humans figured this out, and they used it to revolutionize shelter design. Welcome to the world of semi-subterranean dwellings, homes built partially or completely underground, and they were some of the warmest, most efficient shelters ever created. Let me take you to the Russian steppe, 25,000 years ago. The wind here is merciless. It sweeps across thousands of miles of open grassland with nothing to stop it. In winter, it can drive temperatures down to levels that kill exposed humans in minutes. But if you were here, looking across this frozen landscape, you'd see something strange. Small mounds dotting the plain, hills that don't quite look natural, and rising from each mound, thin trails of smoke. These are dugout shelters, and inside them families are living in remarkable comfort considering the frozen hell outside. Here's how they worked. First, dig a pit, usually circular or oval, about 3 to 5 meters across and 1 to 2 meters deep. The digging alone is brutal work with only stone tools, antler picks and shoulder blades used as shovels. But it's worth it, because once you're below ground level, you've already achieved something crucial. You're out of the wind. Wind chill is one of the biggest killers in cold climates. It strips away your body heat much faster than still air at the same temperature. But underground, there's no wind, the air is still. That alone can make a 10-degree difference in how cold it feels. Next, build your walls, not on the surface but around the pit. Use whatever's available. Mammoth bones, stones, packed earth, wooden poles if you can find them. These walls only need to rise a meter or so above ground level because the pit itself provides most of your protection. Then construct a roof. The most common design used a cone or a dome shape with support beams radiating from a central point. Cover this with hides, thatch, or multiple layers of different materials. Then, and this is brilliant, pile earth back on top of the roof. You've just created a living insulation blanket. Earth is an incredible insulator. It stops wind completely, it absorbs moisture, and it creates thermal mass, meaning it resists temperature changes. When the sun shines during the day, that earth layer warms slightly and holds that heat. When night falls, it releases warmth gradually inward. You've built a battery that charges with sunlight and discharges as warmth all night. Inside, you build your hearth at the centre of the pit, at the lowest point. Warm air rises, so the heat from your fire flows upward and outward, filling the entire space evenly. And because you're below ground, you need less fire to maintain comfortable temperatures. The result? A shelter that could maintain interior temperatures 20 to 30 degrees warmer than outside, using less fuel and less maintenance than surface structures. Archaeologists find these dugout shelters at sites all across the Eurasian steppe, places like Pushkari, Kostenki and Gagarino. And what's fascinating is that each region developed its own variations, but the core principle stayed the same. Go underground. Use the earth itself as insulation. In some areas, builders created elaborate entrance tunnels, not straight down into the pit, but at an angle, sometimes with a bend or two. This created an airlock effect. Cold air entering through the tunnel would sink and flow out, while warm air inside stayed trapped. Modern Arctic research stations use the exact same design. In other regions, builders created multiple connected chambers, one for living, one for storage, one for keeping fire overnight. It's the first version of a multi-room house, and it's 25,000 years old. But here's what really impresses me: the flooring. At many dugout sites, archaeologists find floors that aren't just dirt. They're engineered surfaces, layers of flat stones for stability, then layers of clay or packed earth, then layers of ash from old fires for moisture absorption, then soft plant material for comfort, and finally animal hides that could be shaken out and cleaned regularly. That's not a floor, that's a 5-layer insulation and drainage system. And they didn't stop there. In some shelters, researchers find evidence of shallow trenches dug around the interior perimeter. These trenches would catch any water that seeped through the walls, preventing the living space from becoming muddy. Prehistoric drainage systems, every detail considered, every problem solved. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about these underground shelters is how long the tradition lasted. Because in some regions, people never stopped building them. In northern China, millions of people still live in Yaodong cave houses carved into lush cliffs. These homes stay cool in summer and warm in winter, using no air conditioning or heating. The design is essentially unchanged from what prehistoric humans created 30,000 years ago. In parts of Tunisia, people live in underground homes called troglodyte dwellings. Entire communities exist in excavated pits, with rooms carved into the walls. Star Wars filmed in one of these locations, using it as Luke Skywalker's home planet of Tatooine. That alien architecture. It's actually one of humanity's oldest housing designs. In Turkey, the region of Cappadocia has thousands of underground cities, some extending multiple stories deep. While the most elaborate ones were built more recently, the earliest levels show occupation dating back thousands of years. Same principle, same genius. Going underground isn't primitive. It's sophisticated, it's energy efficient, it's sustainable, it's brilliant, and it raises an interesting question. One that's somewhat controversial in archaeological circles. Why did we stop building underground? As civilizations developed, as we gained new building materials and technologies, we moved above ground. We built up instead of down. We created houses that require constant heating in winter and cooling in summer. We built structures that fight against the natural environment instead of working with it. Why? Some archaeologists argue it's about status. Underground homes are hidden, above-ground structures are visible, impressive, symbols of wealth and power. Others point to practical concerns. Underground homes are harder to expand, harder to adapt for large populations. But I wonder if we lost something in that transition. A deep understanding of natural systems, a willingness to work with the earth rather than dominating it. Because those prehistoric underground dwellings weren't just warm, they were sustainable. They used local materials. They required minimal energy. They lasted for generations with basic maintenance. And they provided comfortable, stable environments in some of the harshest climates on Earth. Maybe that's not primitive. Maybe that's actually advanced. And maybe, as we face climate change and energy crises in the modern world, we need to look back at those ancient shelters and ask, what did they know that we've forgotten? But underground living wasn't the only revolutionary idea prehistoric humans developed, because fire, as brilliant as it was, had a limitation. It required constant fuel. Someone always had to maintain it. Let it go out, and you're back to freezing. So prehistoric builders developed a different strategy, one that didn't require fire at all. One that used the sun, stone, and a deep understanding of thermal mass to create warmth that lasted all night. And when you understand how it worked, you'll realize these people weren't just builders. They were physicists. Chapter 6: Smoke, Stones, and Survival. Let me tell you about a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about prehistoric heating. In the French Pyrenees, archaeologists were excavating a rock shelter dating to about 18,000 years ago. They found the usual things: stone tools, animal bones, charcoal from ancient fires. But they also found something unusual: dozens of large, flat stones, each about the size of a dinner plate. And these stones showed something extraordinary. They'd been heated and cooled repeatedly, hundreds, maybe thousands of times. The mineral structure had actually changed from the extreme temperature cycling. At first, researchers were confused. Why heat rocks over and over? What purpose could that possibly serve? Then someone did an experiment. They heated similar stones in a fire, then placed them around a sleeping area in a reconstructed prehistoric shelter. And they discovered something amazing. The rock stayed warm all night. Not just warm, hot enough to radiate significant heat for 6 to 8 hours. Long enough to keep a small shelter comfortable through an entire winter night without maintaining a fire. Prehistoric humans had invented thermal batteries, natural radiators, and they'd been using them for thousands of years. Let me explain how this works, because it's absolutely brilliant. Different materials absorb and release heat at different rates. Wood and fabric heat up quickly but cool down quickly. Air is even worse, it barely holds heat at all. But stone, especially dense stone like granite or basalt, has high thermal mass. It takes a long time to heat up, but once hot, it releases that heat slowly over many hours. So here's what prehistoric people figured out. During the evening, while you're cooking dinner and people are awake anyway, you keep a fire burning, and you place large stones right next to that fire, or even partially in it. The stones gradually heat up. They absorb thermal energy like batteries absorbing electricity. Then, when everyone's ready to sleep, you carefully move those hot stones to sleeping areas. You might wrap them in hides to prevent burns. You might place them in stone-lined pits to focus the heat. And then you let the fire die down, or even go out completely. It doesn't matter, because the stones are now radiating warmth. Slow, steady, safe warmth that'll last until morning. No fire maintenance needed. No risk of fire spreading while everyone's asleep. No smoke filling the shelter because you're trying to keep flames going all night. Just stones, quietly keeping you warm. Archaeologists find evidence of this technique at sites all across Ice Age Europe and Asia. And the sophistication is impressive, because they didn't just use any stones. They selected specific types. Dense, fine-grained stones like river rocks, granite, or slatework best. They heat evenly and don't crack as easily. Porous stones like sandstone are terrible. They can explode when heated rapidly because trapped moisture expands. So prehistoric people learned to test stones. They figured out through painful trial and error which rocks were safe and which were dangerous, and they passed that knowledge down through generations. At some sites, researchers find stockpiles of specific stones clearly collected and saved for heating purposes. Not just random rocks, but carefully selected pieces, probably gathered from specific locations known for high-quality thermal stones. That's resource management. That's planning. That's sophistication. But stones weren't just used for sleeping warmth. Heated stones revolutionized cooking too. Before pottery, you couldn't boil water directly over a fire. Leather bags or bark containers would burn, but drop hot stones into a leather bag of water and the water boils without damaging the container. Suddenly you can make soups, teas, and extract nutrients from bones that you couldn't access by roasting alone. And in cold weather, a cup of hot soup does more than feed you. It warms you from the inside, it raises your core temperature. It can literally be the difference between life and death if you're suffering from hypothermia. Prehistoric people understood this. They used heated stones not just for shelter warmth, but for nutritional and medical purposes. Warm drinks, warm compresses for injuries, steam for respiratory problems. They were using thermodynamics to survive, without ever writing down a single equation. But thermal mass wasn't just about. The shelters themselves became thermal batteries. Remember those mammoth bone huts we talked about? Those massive bones had incredible thermal mass. During the day, when the sun shone and fires burned, those bones slowly absorbed heat. Then at night, they released it back into the living space. The same principle applied to thick earthen walls in underground shelters, or the rock walls of caves, or even compacted snow in Arctic shelters. Yes, snow properly packed insulates and stores heat remarkably well. Prehistoric builders were designing passive heating systems, structures that absorbed warmth during the day and radiated it at night, reducing the need for constant fire. Modern architects call this passive solar design. We act like it's a recent innovation, but prehistoric humans were doing it 30,000 years ago. And here's something that'll really make you appreciate their genius. They understood the relationship between thermal mass and insulation. These are opposite concepts, but both are necessary. Thermal mass stores heat. Insulation prevents heat loss. You need both. So prehistoric builders created layered structures. Dense, high thermal mass materials on the inside near the heat source. Then insulating layers, hides, thatch, earth on the outside to prevent that stored heat from escaping. It's the same principle behind modern insulated thermoses. Heat-retaining materials inside, insulating layers outside keeps your coffee hot for hours. Prehistoric people were applying the same engineering principles to their homes, and it worked beautifully. But there's one more heating innovation I need to tell you about. One that's so clever, so perfectly adapted to Arctic conditions, that it almost seems impossible. I'm talking about snow itself, used as insulation. In the Arctic, where there's no wood, no earth, and precious little of anything except ice and snow, people learned to build shelters from the very thing that was killing them. They built with cold to stay warm, and the technique they developed, refined over thousands of years, created some of the warmest shelters in human history. Structures that could maintain comfortable interior temperatures even when it was -40 outside. I'm talking about snow houses, igloos, and the engineering behind them is absolutely mind-blowing. If you've ever wondered how someone survives in a house made of ice, stick with me. Because the answer involves physics, creativity, and a deep understanding of snow that most modern people have completely lost. And once you understand it, you'll never look at winter the same way again. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this deep dive into prehistoric innovation, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of people who love learning about human ingenuity, and I'd love to have you as part of it. Also, hit that like button. It tells YouTube this content is valuable and helps us reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's head north to the frozen Arctic, where the next great revolution in shelter design was being born. Chapter 7: The Nomad's Secret. Here's a fact that might surprise you. The most successful prehistoric humans weren't the ones who built the biggest shelters or the strongest walls, they were the ones who learned to move. Because in the Ice Age, nothing stayed constant. Herds migrated, weather patterns shifted, resources appeared and disappeared with the seasons, and the humans who survived weren't the ones who dug in and refused to adapt. They were the nomads, the wanderers, the people who learned to take their warmth with them. Imagine standing on the prehistoric steppe in early spring. The snow is starting to melt. The mammoth herds that sustained your family through the winter are moving north following the fresh grass. You have a choice: stay here in your comfortable mammoth bone hut and hope you can survive on whatever's left, or pack up everything you own and follow the herds into unknown territory. It's not an easy choice. Your shelter represents months of work, maybe generations of work. It's familiar, it's safe. Leaving means starting over, but staying might mean starvation. So you make the hard decision. You're going, and that means somehow, impossibly, you need to carry your home with you. This is where prehistoric humans showed incredible creativity, because they invented something revolutionary: portable architecture, shelters that could be broken down, transported, and rebuilt in new locations. And the techniques they developed are still used by nomadic people all over the world today. Let's start with the simplest design: the basic hide tent. You find or cut several long poles, usually saplings or branches, and arrange them in a cone or dome shape. Then you stretch animal hides over that frame, securing them with sinew, leather straps, or wooden pegs. When it's time to move, you simply untie the hides, collapse the poles, and carry everything with you. The hides roll up into a portable bundle. The poles can be used as travois, dragging frames, to transport other goods. Simple, right? But the devil is in the details, and prehistoric nomads mastered those details. First, pole design. Not just any stick works. You need poles that are light enough to carry but strong enough to support significant weight, especially when snow accumulates on the roof. You need them flexible enough to bend without breaking but rigid enough to stay in shape. Prehistoric builders learned to select specific woods: willow for flexibility, ash for strength, pine for availability, and they learned to treat those poles, sometimes smoking them to increase rigidity, sometimes coating them with animal fat to prevent moisture damage. Each pole was a crafted tool, not just a random stick. Second, hide preparation. Raw animal skin is stiff, heavy, and susceptible to rot, but prehistoric people developed tanning techniques that transformed hides into supple, waterproof, durable materials. They used smoke tanning, which involves literally smoking the hide over a fire for hours or days. This imbues the leather with compounds that make it water-resistant and prevent bacterial decay. They used brain tanning, where animal brains are mashed into a paste and worked into the hide. Sounds disgusting, but it creates incredibly soft, flexible leather. And there's a convenient ratio in nature. Every animal has just enough brains to tan its own hide. They used fat tanning, coating hides with animal fat to waterproof them. When done properly, treated hides could withstand rain, snow, and years of use without rotting. These weren't simple animal skins, they were engineered materials, customized for specific purposes through sophisticated processing techniques. And the way they assembled these portable shelters, that showed even more sophistication. At archaeological sites across Eurasia, researchers find patterns of post holes, stone rings, and bone markers that suggest standardized tent designs. Not identical, but following the same basic principles. Circular bases for wind resistance, steep sides to shed snow, smoke holes at the peak for ventilation. These people were using geometric principles. They understood that circles distribute stress evenly. They knew steep angles prevent snow accumulation. They recognized that hot air rises and smoke needs an exit path at the highest point, all without formal education. All from observation, experimentation, and cultural knowledge passed down through generations. But portable shelters weren't just about the structure. They were about everything that made a space livable. Nomadic families developed portable hearths, flat stones that could be quickly arranged into a fire ring, portable bedding, hides and furs that rolled into compact bundles, portable storage, bags, baskets and containers made from leather, bark or woven plant fibers. Everything they owned needed to be functional, durable and carryable. That constraint forced incredible innovation. Modern backpackers and outdoor enthusiasts spend thousands of dollars on lightweight gear designed for portability. Prehistoric nomads were doing the same thing with stone tools and natural materials, and their gear worked. We know because we find evidence of the same families returning to the same seasonal camps year after year, decade after decade. They weren't wandering randomly. They were following planned routes, using familiar stopping points, rebuilding in locations they'd used before. They had mental maps, cognitive geography, knowledge of where every reliable water source was, where specific resources could be found, where sheltered valleys blocked the worst winds. This wasn't primitive wandering. This was sophisticated land management practiced across entire continents. But here's something fascinating. Nomadic lifestyle didn't mean less sophisticated shelters. In many cases, it meant more sophisticated, because nomads couldn't afford to waste time or energy. Every design element had to be optimized. Every material had to serve multiple purposes. There was no room for inefficiency, so they innovated constantly. They experimented with new pole arrangements, new hide treatments, new fire management techniques, and successful innovations spread rapidly along trade routes and through cultural exchange. The tent designs that worked best proliferated. The ones that didn't work disappeared. It was natural selection applied to architecture, and over thousands of years, this process refined portable shelters to near perfection. By the late Ice Age, nomadic groups were building structures that could be assembled in hours, transported by a few people, and provided the same warmth and protection as permanent shelters. That's not primitive, that's highly advanced. Now here's a controversial question, one that archaeologists love debating. Were nomadic groups actually better off than settled groups? The traditional view is that settling down, building permanent villages, developing agriculture, that's progress. That's civilization advancing. Nomadic lifestyle is seen as a stage we evolved past, but recent research suggests it's not that simple. Nomadic hunter-gatherers often had more diverse diets than early farmers. They had more leisure time. They experienced less disease because they weren't living in permanent settlements where waste accumulated. And their portable lifestyle meant when resources in one area were depleted, they could simply move rather than struggling with scarcity. Maybe nomadic life wasn't a primitive stage. Maybe it was a successful adaptation that worked brilliantly for hundreds of thousands of years. And maybe we shouldn't view settling down as inevitable progress. Maybe it was just a different strategy, one with its own advantages and disadvantages, food for thought, right? But regardless of philosophy, one thing is certain. nomadic peoples developed shelter technology that was absolutely brilliant, and many of their innovations, from portable tents to thermal management to efficient packing systems, are still used today. When you go camping and set up a modern tent, you're using design principles perfected 20,000 years ago. When you pack efficiently for a trip, you're echoing the careful load management of nomadic families. When you choose synthetic fabrics for their water resistance and lightweight, you're solving the same problems prehistoric people solved with treated animal hides. The context changed, the technology advanced, but the fundamental challenges remain the same. How do you stay warm, dry, and comfortable while moving through a challenging environment? Prehistoric nomads figured it out, and their solutions were so good, we're still using them. But there's one more group we need to talk about. One group whose contribution to shelter technology is often overlooked, even though they were probably the most important innovators of all. I'm talking about women, the firekeepers, the homemakers, the ones who turned shelters into homes, and their story is remarkable. Chapter 8: Women Who Tamed Winter. History books love to talk about hunters, the men who brought down mammoths and bison, who tracked herds across frozen plains, who fought off predators, and those stories matter. Hunting was crucial for survival, but here's what those books often miss. While men were out hunting, often for days at a time, women were doing something equally important. They were keeping people alive at home. They were maintaining the fire, processing hides, preparing food, gathering plants, making tools, and most importantly, managing the shelter itself, making sure it stayed warm, dry, functional, and safe. In a very real sense, women were the architects of warmth, and their innovations shaped shelter design in ways we're only now beginning to understand. Let me paint you a picture. It's the middle of winter, 25,000 years ago. The hunting party left 3 days ago, following the mammoth tracks into the northern valleys. In the shelter, it's just women, children, and elders. The fire needs constant attention. Wood must be collected, conserved, and burned efficiently. The shelter needs repairs. A hide wall has torn in the wind. The entrance needs resealing against drafts. Bedding needs refreshing. Food needs preserving. And through all of this, children need care, elders need assistance, tools need making, life goes on. This isn't passive waiting for hunters to return. This is active management of a complex living system. And the women doing this work accumulated an incredible depth of knowledge. They knew which woods burned hottest, which created less smoke, which coals lasted longest. They understood fire management at a level most modern people have completely lost. They knew which plants could be woven into insulating mats, which provided the softest bedding, which repelled insects, which were edible, medicinal, or useful for other purposes. They knew how to treat hides to make them soft, waterproof, durable. They knew dozens of techniques for processing leather, each producing different properties. Smoking for water resistance, brain tanning for softness, fat treatment for flexibility in cold weather. They knew how to identify and seal drafts, how to redirect smoke, how to manage moisture that could make a shelter damp and dangerous. All of this was specialized knowledge, expertise that took years to develop and generations to refine. And crucially, women taught this knowledge to daughters, not through formal education, but through observation, practice, and storytelling. Young girls worked alongside mothers and grandmothers, learning by doing, absorbing thousands of tiny details that made the difference between a barely functional shelter and a truly warm, comfortable home. This was the transmission of survival knowledge, and it happened almost exclusively through women. Now, here's something fascinating. When archaeologists excavate prehistoric sites, They often find tools in different areas of shelters, stone blades and projectile points near entrances, grinding stones and scrapers near hearths. For years, researchers assumed this reflected male and female work areas. Men's tools near the entrance where they'd prepare for hunts, women's tools near the fire where they'd process food and materials. But recent analysis suggests something more interesting. These aren't separate territories, they're integrated workspaces. And women weren't just processing materials, they were making tools, designing improvements, and innovating constantly. At some sites, researchers find evidence of tool-making errors, pieces that broke during manufacturing or were discarded as inadequate. And statistical analysis of these errors suggests that at least some of the toolmakers were learning, experimenting, improving their craft. In other words, young people, possibly young women, were being taught sophisticated skills right there in the shelter. Education was happening, apprenticeship, knowledge transfer, all centered around the hearth and managed primarily by women. And here's where it gets even more interesting. At several sites, archaeologists have found something unexpected. Caches of pigments, carved beads, and decorative items, often near hearth areas, often associated with tools that suggest female use. For a long time, researchers didn't know what to make of this. Why would survival-focused people spend time on decoration? But the more we learn about prehistoric life, the clearer it becomes. Decoration wasn't frivolous. It was communication, social bonding, identity. Art served crucial psychological and social functions, and women appear to have been central to its creation. They decorated shelters with painted symbols. They created beads and pendants that marked family identity or social status. They developed patterns and designs that were shared across communities, creating visual languages that transcended verbal communication. This isn't just survival, this is culture. And culture, it turns out, is essential for long-term survival. Because humans don't just need food and warmth. We need meaning, purpose, connection. Women created that. Around the hearth, through decoration, through stories told while working, they built the social fabric that held communities together through the hardest times. And let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Childbirth and childcare in Ice Age conditions. Giving birth in a freezing environment is incredibly dangerous. Newborns have virtually no temperature regulation. They depend entirely on external warmth. Without proper shelter and fire management, infant mortality would be catastrophic. But somehow humans survived. Populations grew. That means women figured out how to create environments warm and stable enough for newborns to survive. They probably used every technique available. Skin-to-skin contact, tightly wrapped hides, dedicated warm areas near hearths, constant monitoring of infant body temperature. And they did this in shelters that were often cramped, smoky, and far from ideal, yet they succeeded. Generation after generation. That's not luck. That's skill. That's sophisticated understanding of physiology and environmental management. Prehistoric women were keeping the most vulnerable members of society alive in conditions that would terrify most modern parents. And we should honour that, because without their expertise, none of us would be here. Now, here's a controversial question, one that makes some people uncomfortable. Why don't we know more about women's contributions to prehistoric innovation? Part of it is the nature of archaeological evidence. Tools and structures preserve, but many of the materials women worked with, plant fibres, leather, wood, don't survive thousands of years. So the physical evidence of their work has largely disappeared. Part of it is historical bias. For generations, archaeologists assumed men did the important, innovative work while women did repetitive, simple tasks. That bias shaped what researchers looked for and how they interpreted what they found. But as archaeology becomes more sophisticated, As we develop new analytical techniques and ask better questions, we're discovering that women's work was far more complex and innovative than previously believed. They weren't assistants, they were architects, engineers, innovators, leaders in developing the technologies that kept humans alive through the Ice Age. And recognizing that doesn't diminish men's contributions, it enriches our understanding of how humans actually survived. By working together, by developing complementary expertise, by sharing knowledge across generations. That's the real story of prehistoric shelters. Not individual heroes building alone, but communities, families, generations working together to create warmth in an impossibly cold world. And at the center of those communities, tending the fire that literally kept civilization alive, were women. We owe them everything, and we're only now beginning to understand just how much. But our journey through prehistoric shelter technology isn't over. Because there's one more story I need to tell you. One more mystery that archaeologists are still trying to solve. A discovery that doesn't fit neatly into anything we thought we knew about Ice Age humans. It's the story of the last shelter. The most advanced, most sophisticated prehistoric structure ever found. And it raises questions about human capability that we still can't fully answer. Chapter 9. The Mystery of the Last Shelter. In 2008, archaeologists working in Siberia made a discovery that changed everything. They were excavating a site called Yana RHS, located above the Arctic Circle, about as far north as humans lived during the Ice Age. It's a brutal location. Even in summer, temperatures barely rise above freezing. In winter, it's one of the coldest places on Earth. Nobody expected to find much there, maybe some temporary camps, evidence of brief visits during warmer periods. What they found instead was astonishing, a permanent settlement dating to 32,000 years ago. With shelter remains that suggested these people didn't just survive the Arctic, they thrived there. The structures were unlike anything found elsewhere, partially underground like dugout shelters, but far more complex. The foundation showed multiple construction layers, suggesting repairs and improvements over many years. The walls appeared to be composite constructions, bone frameworks covered with multiple layers of different materials. Hide on the inside for air tightness, woven plant fibers in the middle for insulation, earth and sod on the outside for thermal mass and wind protection. 3-layer walls 32,000 years ago in the Arctic. The floor showed evidence of sophisticated preparation, gravel for drainage, clay for moisture barrier, ash for insulation, plant bedding for comfort, and something else, something that stunned researchers. Traces of woven grass mats, not simple bedding, actual woven textiles, geometric patterns suggesting deliberate design. That's not just survival technology, that's art, that's culture. That's people who had enough security and stability to develop aesthetic traditions. In the Arctic, during the Ice Age, the hearth at this site showed incredible sophistication. Multiple fire pits connected by shallow trenches. Researchers think these trenches distributed smoke and heat throughout the shelter, creating an early ventilation system. And the fuel they used? Analysis shows a mix of wood, bone and animal fat, carefully managed to maximize heat output while minimizing smoke. These weren't desperate people barely clinging to life. These were skilled engineers creating advanced living systems. But here's what really makes this site mysterious. The artifacts found there show evidence of long-distance trade. Ivory from mammoths killed hundreds of kilometers away. Stone tools made from rock types that don't exist in the region. Even shell beads from marine mollusks that live in seas hundreds of kilometers distant. That means these people were part of a network. They were connected to other groups. They were trading, communicating, exchanging not just goods but ideas. In one of the most remote, hostile environments on Earth, they were building civilization. How? Why? What drove humans to push into such extreme conditions? And more importantly, what did they know that we've forgotten? Because here's the thing that keeps archaeologists up at night. We could not replicate what they did. Modern humans, with all our technology, would struggle to survive long-term in that location, with only the tools and materials they had. We've lost that knowledge, that deep intuitive understanding of natural systems, that ability to read the environment and use every resource to its maximum potential, and we don't fully understand how they learned it in the first place. Which brings us to perhaps the most controversial question in prehistoric archaeology. How much knowledge did Ice Age humans actually possess? The traditional view is that they knew only what they needed to survive. Practical skills, but no deep understanding. No systematic knowledge. But the more we learn, the less that explanation fits, because the shelters they built required understanding of thermodynamics, structural engineering, material science, and environmental management. You can't accidentally build a 3-layer composite wall. You can't stumble into an efficient heat distribution system. Those things require conceptual understanding. Theory, the ability to plan and test and refine, that's science. Maybe not written down, maybe not formalized, but science nonetheless. So here's the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe Ice Age humans weren't primitive at all. Maybe they possessed sophisticated knowledge systems that we've only recently redeveloped using modern or scientific methods. Maybe we haven't progressed as much as we think. Maybe we've just changed. Different knowledge, different priorities, but not necessarily superior. That's a humbling thought. The idea that people 30,000 years ago might have understood aspects of survival and environmental integration better than we do today. But the evidence keeps pointing in that direction. At site after site, we find innovations that seem impossibly advanced. Composite materials, passive heating systems, sophisticated resource management, complex social organization, and we're forced to ask, what else did they know? What other technologies and techniques have been lost in the intervening millennia? We may never know, because most knowledge from that era was oral, passed down through teaching and observation, never written, never preserved. When the Ice Age ended, when climates changed and lifestyles shifted, much of that knowledge became obsolete, and it vanished, lost forever. Unless we can rediscover it by studying the archaeological remains they left behind. That's what makes sites like Yarnus so important. They're windows into lost worlds of knowledge. Each discovery is a piece of a vast puzzle we're trying to reassemble. And here's something beautiful. Every time we learn something new about prehistoric shelters, we gain insights that can help us today. Passive heating systems, natural insulation, sustainable building materials, energy efficiency. These aren't just historical curiosities. They are solutions to modern problems. As we face climate change and energy crises, maybe we need to look backward as well as forward. Maybe our ancestors, who survived catastrophic climate shift with minimal resources, have lessons to teach us about resilience and adaptation. Maybe the warmest shelters in history weren't just important for keeping Ice Age humans alive. Maybe they are important for helping modern humans survive the challenges we face today. That's not nostalgia. That's practical wisdom. Knowledge refined over thousands of years of trial and error. Tested in the harshest conditions imaginable. Proven effective time and time again. And it's still there, buried in the archaeological record, waiting for us to rediscover it. So the mystery of the last shelter isn't just about the past. It's about the future. About reconnecting with ancient wisdom. About remembering that humans have always been brilliant problem solvers. And about recognizing that warmth, true warmth, isn't just about temperature. It's about community, about knowledge shared across generations, about the fire that connects us to our deepest past and our farthest future. That fire is still burning, as long as we remember to tend it. Chapter 10. Warmth that changed everything. Let's come full circle, back to where we started, back to that moment of choice on the frozen plain. Stay or go, freeze or adapt, give up or survive. Our ancestors chose survival, and that choice, made over and over again across thousands of generations, shaped everything about who we are today. The shelters they built weren't just structures, they were revolutions. Each innovation, from the first controlled fire to the last sophisticated Arctic shelter, represented a choice to keep going, to refuse defeat, to believe that warmth was possible even in the coldest darkness. And here's what I want you to understand: that same spirit, that same stubborn determination to survive and thrive is still in you. You carry it in your genes, in your instincts, in the way you seek warmth and comfort, in the way you create homes and communities. When you light a fire on a cold evening, you're echoing actions that stretch back hundreds of thousands of years. When you arrange your living space for comfort, you're applying principles first developed in mammoth bone huts and Ice Age caves. You are the inheritor of the warmest shelters in history, not just the physical structures, but the knowledge, the creativity, the determination they represent. And that matters, because the world still has cold places, not always physical, though those exist too, but emotional cold, social isolation, the darkness of difficult times, and the solution is still the same. Build warmth, create shelter, maintain the fire, not alone but together. That's what our ancestors taught us, not through words but through action, by building homes that brought people together, by keeping fires burning that drew families into circles of light, by creating spaces where stories could be told, skills could be taught, and love could flourish. Warmth wasn't just about survival, it was about connection, about making life worth living, even when the world outside was harsh and unforgiving. And we need that now more than ever. Because modern life, for all its comforts, can be cold in its own ways. We have heated homes, but sometimes lack warm communities. We have technological connection, but sometimes miss human connection. Maybe the solution is older than we think. Maybe we need to rediscover what our ancestors knew. That warmth starts with fire, with gathering, with sharing space and stories and struggles. That a home isn't just a building, it's a feeling, a sense of safety and belonging that comes from people choosing to build together, to maintain the flames together, to weather the storms together. The shelters we've explored tonight weren't remarkable because of their physical properties, though those were impressive. They were remarkable because of what they represented. Human communities refusing to accept the world as it was, and instead creating the world they needed. Every bone carefully positioned in a mammoth hut was an act of defiance. Every fire maintained through a frozen night was a statement of hope. Every child taught how to build a shelter was an investment in the future. They believed tomorrow could be warmer than today, and they were right. Over thousands of years, humans spread from a small population in Africa to every continent on Earth. We survived ice ages and droughts, we crossed oceans and climbed mountains, we built civilizations from nothing, and it all started with shelter, with learning to create warmth in the coldest places imaginable. That's your heritage, that's your story. You are the descendant of the warmest builders, the best survivors, the most determined innovators in the history of life on Earth. So when you face your own cold moments, remember them. Remember the families huddled in mammoth bone huts while blizzards raged outside. Remember the firekeepers who maintained flames through the longest nights. Remember the nomads who carried warmth with them across frozen continents. Remember the women who taught generations how to survive, how to thrive, how to create beauty even in the harshest conditions. You come from that. You carry that strength. And when you need it, it's there. Build your shelter. Maintain your fire. Gather your people close. Create warmth in the cold places. Not just for yourself, but for others. Because that's what humans do. That's what we've always done. We build, we warm, we survive together. And thousands of years from now, when people look back at us, they'll tell stories about how we faced our own challenges, about how we chose warmth over cold, hope over despair, connection over isolation. They'll tell stories about us the way we tell stories about our Ice Age ancestors, with wonder, with respect, with gratitude. Because we didn't give up. We kept the fire burning. We built warmth that changed everything. That's the legacy of the prehistoric shelter builders, and it's your legacy too. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in whatever warmth you've built for yourself, take a moment to appreciate it, to feel grateful for the roof over your head, the warmth surrounding you, the safety that lets you rest. And remember that somewhere, deep in the past, someone just like you made a choice to survive, to build, to create warmth where none existed. And because they did, you're here, warm, safe, alive. That's not just history, that's a miracle. A miracle that happened over and over, generation after generation, fire after fire, shelter after shelter. The warmest shelters in history weren't made of mammoth bones or stone walls or woven hides. They were made of human determination, of knowledge shared, of communities working together. And that kind of warmth, that never goes out. It passes from heart to heart, generation to generation, fire to fire, as long as we remember to tend it, as long as we choose to build together. The Ice Age is long over, but the fires they lit still burn. In you, in your home, in the warmth you create and share. Keep it burning, pass it on, build warmth in the cold places. That's what we've always done, that's what we'll always do, because we're human, and humans survive together. Sleep well, stay warm, and remember, you're part of the longest story of survival ever told. A story that started in a frozen cave 40,000 years ago and continues tonight in your warm bed under your safe roof. The fire still burns and always will. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If this journey through time meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Someone who needs a reminder of human strength and resilience. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, more journeys into the incredible ingenuity of our ancestors. And leave a comment. Tell me what spoke to you, what surprised you, what you'll remember. Until next time, stay curious, stay warm, and keep building. Good night.